Can you imagine a world where the US and Cuba were connected by a tunnel under the sea? What impact would this have on the politics, economy, culture, and society of both countries? How would it change the history of Latin America and the Caribbean? In this video, we will explore the idea of the consequences and results of a tunnel between Cuba and the USA, a project that might seem impossible but could have surprising effects. Ready to travel to a parallel dimension? Unlike our previous videos, this is where we would have to talk about the political status of our two protagonists of the day. But hey, this is a pretty special video, so first we have to develop our main unknown from another point of view, the scientific one. The natural history of both terrains is very different, since Cuba is an island of volcanic origin, with a mountainous relief and tropical vegetation, while the USA is a continental country, with a great diversity of climates, landscapes, and natural resources. Although on this occasion we will have to focus specifically on the terrain of Florida, which consists of subtropical and temperate climate, and its curious ecosystem includes swamps, forests, and beaches. Both countries have a rich biodiversity but have also suffered processes of deforestation, pollution, and habitat loss due to a certain revolution in the 19th century. On the other hand, Cuba is a rather small island, and the truth is that absolutely all areas of the country share the same climate and ecosystem. But for the sake of a more concise and focused video, everything we will mention will happen in Havana, as the capital of the country is in the north and therefore closer to the United States. By the way, have you already subscribed to this channel? The distance between the two countries is quite considerable, about 2,289 kilometers in a straight line. The shortest route between the two countries is about 1,500 kilometers and runs from the Bahamas to Florida, starting in Key West, Florida, and Punta Cacos, Cuba. Still, in the grand scheme of things, those thousands of miles should be nothing if many Cubans can risk it on rafts to have better lives in the United States, so it's not the biggest challenge of the project. But don't worry, we will talk about that. The United States would seek to optimize the project, and the megaproject linking the two countries would be built on this shorter route. While we are on the subject of infrastructure, I have a confession to make. The true reality of the project would be more of a maritime bridge that would include underwater tunnels in some areas for one simple reason. Legally, there are navigation zones that must be respected and cannot be obstructed. And you are probably asking yourself, why not make it underwater then? And that also has a pretty straightforward answer, which I will answer with another question. Do you have any idea of the exaggerated costs that such a project would entail? Not even a power like the United States could afford something like that. Luckily, for us, there is a bridge of this type that will work as the perfect example to give us an idea of what our megaproject would look like. I'm talking about China's mega sea bridge called the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macao Bridge, which by the way is the longest sea bridge in the world, with a length of 55 kilometers. The bridge includes a series of bridges of various heights, artificial islands, and a 6.7-kilometer underwater tunnel, which is the longest underwater tunnel in the world. Crazy, don't you think? The bridge was made to connect the country's two administrative regions, Hong Kong and Macau, and faced several of the same problems that the Cuba-Florida bridge would face. This bridge cost about $18.3 billion and took about 8 years to build, from 2009 to 2017. And as a last fact we should know about this bridge, its maintenance costs are estimated at $100 billion per year. Almost nothing. Huh? You have to keep in mind that making sure that the bridge does not collapse or the tunnels are not flooded requires a lot of work and technology. Now, all this data can help us create our hypothetical bridge. First of all, we already have our starting point and destination. In Key West and Punta Cacos, the pillars of the bridge would be built at both ends. From here would begin the extension over the sea for a few km until it meets the first bump in the road, the Yucatan Channel and the Strait of Florida. So here would be built our first tunnels of about 150 kilometers each. And although I think I was late in mentioning it, that's because I trust you already realized it, that this mega bridge would dethrone the one in China as the largest maritime bridge in the world, and by far, only one of these underwater areas would be 3 times bigger than the bridge we talked about a while ago. And while this all sounds incredible, it's time for us to talk about some of the biggest challenges facing our bridge. To start with the construction costs. Doing some calculations, I was able to determine that the cost of building the bridge would be somewhere between $200 billion and $2019.45 billion, which makes China's bridge look like child's play in comparison. And if the construction cost has left you speechless, I'll be honest, I wouldn't even know how to begin to calculate the annual maintenance cost, because here we run into another problem. China's maritime bridge is built in a relatively calm area, but our bridge would have to support weight, wind, and sea currents, and on top of it the depth so varied would make the installation of tunnels and pillars quite difficult. Add to that the currents, waves, and possible earthquakes or hurricanes, among many other disadvantages of the Caribbean Sea. In addition to all these natural problems, you have to consider the tremendous impact that such a project would have on the environment and marine life, and of course, many organizations would not stand idly by. So, let's assume that technology advances incredibly in a few years and the US succeeds in making this megaproject a reality. Now what? Before we answer that, let's go back a bit, because we have to ask ourselves a question. Why the hassle in the first place? In other words, what does the US have to gain from all this? The socialists have bled even Cuba to a skeleton, and they have nothing to offer. Not only that, the regime has indoctrinated half of its citizens to hate Americans and anything minimally related to capitalism, and the other half would just have an easier time sneaking into the country illegally. Obviously, it's easier to walk a giant bridge than it is to leave on a raft. The only answer I could come up with to answer this question and make sense of this scenario is pretty far-fetched, but I really can't find another way out. The United States has decided to intervene and Cuba now belongs to them. It's their land, and they can do whatever they want with it. So, after taking over Cuba, the United States would reform it and turn it into a tourist center, fix most of the problems the country already had, like the cities falling apart, the infrastructure 50 years behind in time, the lack of freedom and production, and lawn etc. But it would generate many other problems in the process. Probably the country would turn into a conflict zone and hundreds of lives would be lost, both innocent and soldiers. Some Cubans would receive political asylum in their lands, as long as they accept the new reality, and little by little businessmen and even families would move in to start investing and building a new society on this island. After many years, Cuba finally becomes, and more than anything else feels like American land. It is here when the country decides to bet on this new mega project, as it would be quite convenient to gather its land, both for tourism and for the citizens. And although the project faces all the problems we already mentioned, it succeeded. What happens now? Well, the truth is that not much. The most interesting thing has already happened during the invasion. The world has already faced a historical event, and this mega bridge would be nothing more than a capitalist whim that the USA would build just to show Russia and China who has the biggest wallet. In this journey, through a parallel dimension, we have explored the possibility of a tunnel between the United States and Cuba. A project that, although hypothetical, has allowed us to reflect on the political, economic, social, and environmental implications of such an undertaking. And remember, although it may seem impossible, the possibilities are endless in our imagination. If you want to know more stories and show your support, just a couple of clicks, like, and subscribe. See you when it's time to explore another world. See you next time.